Well, hello and welcome to our Congressional Western Caucus Forum titled Promoting American Energy Dominance, Developing the Lonestar State. And I want to welcome my friend and colleague, Mr. Henry Cuellar, who represents the 28th Congressional District of the great state of Texas. Thanks for being with me, Henry. I also want to give thanks to our witnesses for taking time out of their really busy schedules to be here with us today to discuss a topic of critical importance, that of domestic energy development. Energy industries, and more specifically, the oil and natural gas sectors in the United States truly have a great story to tell. Over the past several decades, the U.S. has worked to be a global leader in energy development. We pushed to ensure that safe and responsible domestic energy production is a top priority, and we've done so while also successfully providing affordable and reliable energy to communities clear across the country. By increasing our domestic production, we recently achieved energy independence for the first time in decades, becoming a net exporter of energy for our allies across the world. With that increased domestic energy production has come more jobs, increased pay for workers, it's strengthened community investment, and additional opportunities for alternative energy exploration. With a heightened focus on energy production in the United States, companies, communities, and elected officials have also put an emphasis on environmental stewardship, something oil and natural gas companies have taken to heart. Not only has the industry driven down methane emissions by 23% since 1990, while natural gas production has increased by 71%, but they've also spearheaded research and development on technologies that make producing energy cleaner and more efficient. According to a study conducted by PwC in 2019, the oil and gas industry supported 11.3 million jobs and nearly $1.7 trillion to the US economy. And now, as we work to recover from an economic depression and a global pandemic, those jobs and the economic benefits from the industry are going to be more important than ever before. And I know this message rings true in Texas. In 2019, the U.S. led the world in oil and natural gas production, with Texas leading the charge. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, Texas is one of the top crude and natural gas producing states in the nation. In 2020, Texas accounted for 43% of the nation's oil production and 26% of the nation's natural gas production. The PwC study noted that the oil and gas industry in Texas supported more than 2.5 million total jobs statewide in 2019. Another important note to highlight is that for every direct job in the industry, another 3.5 million jobs were created. Another 3.5 jobs were created for every direct job in the industry. Oil and gas contributed more than any other industry to the state's gross domestic product at more than $411 billion. And the sector also holds the highest individual income of any industry in Texas, with the average oil and gas worker making more than $128,000. According to the Texas Oil and Gas Association, in fiscal year 2020, the industry paid $13.9 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. This money trickles down to support Texas schools, which received more than $2 billion, and local counties, which received nearly $690 million, all in property taxes. In Texas, the oil and natural gas industry anchors the economy through high-paying jobs, generating revenue and producing funds for schools, roads, and critical infrastructure and other essential services provided by the state and local communities. The Eagle Ford Shale in South Texas, much of it located in Mr. Cuellar's district, has spurred a significant transformation of the region over just the past decade, catapulting it into one of the most significant economic development zones in the nation. So this is all to say, Revenues from oil and natural gas development are critical for local communities, for businesses, for Texans. And nowhere is it more apparent that cutting these revenues by throttling our oil and gas industry has a severe impact on low income and rural communities. And I look forward to today's discussions. And it's my hope that we can highlight the bipartisan support, recognizing the importance of this issue. So with that, I would now take great pleasure in turning it over to my colleague, Mr. Cuellar, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Dan. Mr. Congressman Newhouse has been a leader in the oil and gas, and we appreciate the leadership that you have provided, Dan. So again, thank you so much. To the witnesses today, Stephanie Moreno, Silver, Vazquez, Adrian, Lopez, again, it's always a pleasure. And again, we appreciate how we all work together on these issues. I think Congressman Newhouse has explained the importance of oil and gas in the state of Texas. As you know, we're #1 in the country when it comes to oil and gas. But at the same time, we're #1 in the country when it comes to wind production. So we're able to push oil and gas, but at the same time still be on the alternatives on the wind in the whole country. On the solar part of it, NatBank, which is based in San Antonio, is starting to do investments also not only in wind, but they're also doing investments in solar. In fact, they just put money there to probably establish the largest solar farm in the state down there in Webb County, my hometown. So again, we support the energy, oil and gas, but at the same time, we see wind as solar as alternatives also that can coexist in a place like the state of Texas and other places. Certainly, I think as Congressman Newhouse said, when you look at oil and gas, it's very, very, very important to understand the impact. You know, when Colonial Pipeline was attacked and the supplies of gas were cut off, you noticed the reaction. People were concerned about what was happening because it shows you the great dependency that we have on oil and gas. In different areas, you know, when you talk about jobs, there are a lot of jobs in the state of Texas that are created by the oil and gas industry. The paying, the salary for oil and gas is more than the average. In fact, if you look at the average private sector salary in the US, it's about $55,000, a little bit over $55,000. But if you look at the oil and gas average salary, you're looking at $102,000. So it's much higher than what the average is. So it's good paying jobs that we have there. And it's not only the jobs or the money that's put in the economy, but I know the taxes are paid because I used to be in the state legislature in Austin. I used to be in the appropriations, like Dan and I are now in the appropriation of the US Congress. And I saw the amount of monies that come to the state budget. I used to be chairman of the budget for both public and higher ed, and we certainly know the monies that come to our public schools. As an example, there's a school district in Laredo, the United Independent School District, that gets a little bit over $63 million on just the mineral valuations, oil and gas. So imagine if you took that oil and gas tax base away, what would happen to a school district? Either they would have to cut teachers or cut monies from the school district in the amount of $63 million, or they would have to raise taxes in the amount of $63 million. And that's only a school district. Imagine the counties and the cities, especially around the Eagle Ford, as Dan says, it's a big part of my district itself. So it's important, and we certainly know the monies that Texas A&M and the University of Texas get on the POP funds, the mineral interest that they get. I know that because I've dealt with that budget. So it's monies that go to higher ed and certainly monies that go to public ed, along with other local governments. I've been working, just like Dan has, on oil and gas. In fact, some years ago in 2015, I worked with Joe Barton, Republican from Texas, Dallas, and I was the lead Democrat, he was the lead Republican. So we worked on lifting the ban on oil exports. We did it in 1 year, And in December of 2015, when the omnibus appropriation bill passed, that legislation got added to the appropriation bill, and we lifted the ban. And for anybody that is familiar with Texas, if you recall, that was on December 15th of 2015. And a little bit after that, in January, the first oil export came from the Eagle Ford, got sent over to the Corpus Christi, and from there it went off to Europe. And after that, it's become history, where we now have LNGs and other exports. And I think that was a game changer because we're able to create more jobs, not only in Texas, but in the states that work on that. In addition, some years ago, Will Hurd and myself, Congressman Hurd, we worked on getting approval for the crude oil swaps with Mexico. And from there, of course, we also know that when you look at natural gas, most of the natural gas exportation from the state of Texas, over 50% of that goes south into Mexico. So Mexico depends a lot on the natural gas exportations that we have. Currently, in another caucus, in fact, I'll be meeting with a group later on with the Taiwanese, Luke Correa, Carol Miller, Joey Arrington, we're the co-chairs of the Bipartisan Energy Export Caucus. Same type of focus that Dan Newhouse has on this also. Finally, let me just talk about a couple of things. LNGs, we've been working in a bipartisan way to try to get approval of LNG exports to non-FTA countries. And then in the appropriations also, Dan and I have been working. We saw this in FY21, but let me jump to FY22, which is the current appropriation bills that we're working on. We added, and this is something I've been working on, $150 million for carbon capture, $100 million for carbon storage, $50 million to do designs, to have this work that we do on carbon capture, carbon storage, carbon utilization. And we've added monies on technology so we can have the best technology and work with the private sector. Because after all, the oil and gas industry is not the enemy. The emissions is the enemy. That's what we need to go. Methane emissions and the monies that we put in for technology, that's what we ought to focus on. We are going to see a transition from oil and gas to alternatives, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. But as we move into that transition, we got to make sure that we use the best technology to make sure that we capture carbon emissions so we can make energy as clean as possible. So it's been my pleasure to serve with Dan in the appropriations. He does a wonderful job. And again, I'll be here for a while and then ask a couple of questions, and then I got to go speak on a West Texas issue that deals with the Permian oil and gas and a nuclear dump that they want to set up there.
Very good, Henry. Thank you very much. Appreciate your hard work on this over a long period of time. You bring a great amount of understanding to this. So here on the Congressional Western Caucus Forum, we are privileged and delighted to have some very capable individuals to share with us some of their thoughts as witnesses. And I haven't had an opportunity to meet our first panelist, but I'd now like to recognize Mrs. Stephanie Moreno. Mrs. Moreno is the Executive Director of the South Texas Energy and Economic Roundtable. I believe you call that for short STEER. Is that right?
That's right.
Ms. Moreno is an experienced advocate and leader in South Texas, having served as B County Judge from May 2015 until her appointment to steer in January of 2020. Recently, Ms. Moreno was elected to the Beeville ISD Board of Trustees. So
Yes.
welcome, Ms. Moreno. Happy to have you here, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Newhouse and Congressman Cuellar. Appreciate you all having us on today. I am the Executive Director for the South Texas Energy and Economic Roundtable. We are the regional effort of the Texas Oil and Gas Association representing South Texas and the Eagle Ford Shale. And as Congressman mentioned earlier, in November 2019, for the first time in decades, our country became a net exporter of petroleum products, including both refined petroleum products and crude oil, providing energy independence for our country. This proud milestone is not only a source of independence and security for our country, but it is also the source of financial independence to the state of Texas, our local governments, and our school districts. As mentioned, in 2020, the Texas oil and natural gas industry paid $13.9 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. This steady stream of revenue is critical in providing equipment to our first responders, billions in funding for K-12 public education, scholarship opportunities for first-generation college-bound students, and savings we rely on to help us through natural disasters, economic downturns, and more recently, global pandemics. As a former county judge, I witnessed firsthand the struggles rural communities have in bringing doctors, jobs, and opportunities to small communities with limited resources. The oil and natural gas industry not only impacts the number of jobs in these rural communities, but the investments made by the oil and natural gas industry fund economic development organizations, hospital districts, walking trails, and festivals. It allows rural communities to compete with larger cities in providing the quality of life families deserve. When I was pregnant with my son, I struggled with decisions that many women struggle with living in rural communities with limited healthcare options. Do I choose a doctor in a bigger city? Should I drive an hour or more every month during my pregnancy? Do I want to be on the road while in labor, possibly in the middle of the night? And what if I don't have time to get there? Luckily, my choice was easy. Because I live in the Eagle Ford Shale, where the oil and natural gas industry contributes up to 87% of a county's tax base, I'm lucky enough to live within 5 miles of the hospital where I delivered my son. The oil and natural gas industry's impact goes deeper than the community benefits we see across the state. High-paying jobs provide independence for families with opportunities for growth year after year. In fiscal year 2020, the industry employed 400,974 hardworking Texans who on average earned $128,861 each. That's more than double the average pay compared to other private sectors. An analysis just released last week by Texoga and the American Petroleum Institute revealed that for every direct job in the Texas oil and natural gas industry, an additional 3 jobs are generated elsewhere in Texas's economy. The oil and natural gas industry offers retirement options and savings to families in rural communities who never thought they could stop living paycheck to paycheck. And this gives their children opportunities they never imagined possible. Products and services that power our economy and keep life moving, from computers and high-speed internet connections to food deliveries and virtual celebrations, are all made possible because of oil and natural gas. Nearly every in-demand product we need to be safe and to save lives, from face shields to other PPE, ventilators, and hand sanitizers, are made from oil and natural gas. In fact, even before the pandemic, 96% of the products we use every day, like pharmaceuticals, electronics, cosmetics, and clothing, are all made from oil and natural gas. There is no substitute for oil and natural gas, and a strong, robust industry benefits every American, whether they live near the oil patch or not. You can see how it is clear that oil and natural gas make our nation, state, local communities, and families stronger in so many different ways. It has also made our environment cleaner. We know that the expanded use of natural gas in power generation is the #1 reason the United States leads the world in reducing energy-related CO2 emissions, outpacing all participants of the Paris Climate Accord. Just recently, the Energy Information Administration, a division of the US Department of Energy, announced that in 2020, the United States produced the least carbon dioxide emissions from energy in nearly 40 years. In other words, CO2 emissions from energy consumption in the United States fell to the lowest level since 1983. In December, US LNG exports hit a new record, delivering the economic and environmental benefits of American natural gas to our trade partners across the globe. Expanded LNG exports are important because we know that affordable and reliable energy has the power to lift communities out of poverty and improve people's health as they move away from other forms of fuel like wood or animal waste, which is still used by nearly 3 billion people worldwide to cook and heat their homes. Not only that, clean natural gas is and will continue to advance environmental progress. It is a big part of the solution to climate concerns. American produced oil, refined products, and natural gas are good for the world because our resource development is backed by innovation and a commitment to the environment that is not matched by all other countries. Make no mistake about it. Imposing restrictions on production will only make other producing countries with fewer environmental restrictions stronger, while eliminating jobs in rural communities and killing our economy at home. I ask that you strengthen our economy and environment with continued support for the oil and natural gas industry. I ask that you ensure continued responsible development of the essential energy infrastructure necessary to meet the demands of our booming population. We all rely on electric transmission lines, roads, high-speed internet, drainage and flood control, and pipelines for water, oil, natural gas, and transportation fuels. And the expansion of this infrastructure is essential to our country's continued growth and success. And finally, I ask that you commit to science-based policy and rational discussions related to environmental issues with the leading innovators, the oil and natural gas industry, at the table. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much for that, Mrs. Moreno. Great words and very well spoken. Thank you. Next, I would like to recognize Mr. Silver Vazquez. He's a principal at Quatro Strategic Solutions. Mr. Vazquez has been a consultant for STEER, so I'm guessing you know Mrs. Moreno, and is well-versed in the economic development efforts in the Eagle Ford Shale and has been for many years. Mr. Vazquez, we're excited to have you here today and hear your insight and what you have to say. So I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Congressman Newhouse. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for hosting this. And Congressman Cuellar, thank you so much for all you do for rural communities in South Texas, whether it's attending the Catula fire truck giveaway or doing some of the other stuff that you do. It's fantastic and the community appreciates you. Again, my name is Silver Vazquez and I'm a consultant in the oil and gas industry. I represent a number of companies and trade groups throughout the state, but I cut my teeth in the industry in the Barnett Shale in 2006, which was kind of the advent of the shale boom that took place in North Texas. And for the first time in decades, you saw urban drilling or drilling in Fort Worth and Burleson and areas like that, where you'd see a rig right next to a school or right next to a TCU or something like that. And having seen that and seeing the way science and technology came together to kind of lead us on this path towards energy independence, I became a staunch advocate for the industry and was lucky enough to be working for Chesapeake Energy at the time, who was on the forefront of developing educational awareness plans for the community at large and people who didn't understand oil and gas. Well, at that time in 2006, 7, 8, the thoughts were that with hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, you were only ever going to be able to get natural gas molecules out of shale. And, you fast forward a couple of years later into the Eagle Ford Shale, and, that proved to be false, right? We were able to get oil and condensate out of the ground and really revolutionize the way energy was produced in America. The the best thing that ever happened to the Eagle Ford Shale were the Haynesville Shale, the Marcellus Shale, the Fayetteville Shale, because it gave the industry several opportunities across the country to figure out a way to really engage with local populations and rural communities to put forth programs that really encouraged engagement and collaboration to uplift the community. We really wanted to get away from the stigma that the oil and gas industry comes in, there's a huge boom, and then we're gone, and things were, left sometimes worse than we originally found them. And so what we wanted to do was, allow communities to be engaged in conversations, to weigh in on development, and to set a new baseline, right? So even though there's going to be this boom or this influx of operations, that once the price settled a bit and the frenzy was over, you might have started here, but now you're going to end up just kind of a little bit lower than that. And so in having those discussions with local leaders, county judges, state reps, folks like Congressman Cuellar, we were able to form the Eagle Ford Shale Consortium, the industry was, and bring together stakeholders from across a really broad area of South Texas to talk about issues like education and workforce, economic development, environment, and all of finance, banking, all of the stuff that come along with a shale play that you don't really expect. We had hospitals, we had hospitality folks, all part of that group, really come together to have some of those tough discussions. And what worked so well amongst that group was that we could have some frank discussions, and then at the end of the day, come together to provide a collaboration that impacted the South Texas area in a very positive way. And I don't know that before the Eagle Ford Shale Consortium, that there was another group that really impacted the community the way that group did. But you fast forward a couple of years later into where we are now, and we've seen a couple of ups and downs in the oil supply market. But if you look in South Texas, they've done a really good job of kind of hanging on to what makes them tick. And there is some cross collaboration amongst counties, but the one thing that I've seen now more than ever is a desire for people that work in the industry to be advocates. This is an industry that's been in South Texas for generations. And so you've got great grandfathers, grandfathers, uncles, cousins who have all worked in the oil and gas industry, and yet they may never talk about it. They just kind of keep their head down and work hard. And then with the keep their head down and work hard, but they never really talk about what they're doing. They don't talk about all the good things that they're doing. And with some of the rhetoric that was coming out during the last election, good, bad, or indifferent, people in the oil and gas industry, especially in South Texas, were like, hey, we are doing something good here. We are helping provide energy for the nation, and we don't think it's a bad thing. And part of that is the oil and gas industry's fault. Sometimes we take for granted some of the stuff that we're doing, some of the innovations and technology that allow us to be leaders in environmental stewardship. We don't share that because we feel like it's patting ourselves on the back. But what we should be doing is talking with our employees, talking with stakeholders, and showcasing what we're doing to make the environment better. Because if we don't have a good environment, if we don't have a healthy planet, it doesn't matter how much oil and gas that you produce, because we'd be working on a downward trend. And so one thing that we've tried to do over the last probably I'd say 6 to 8 months is really showcase the impact that oil and gas has on your everyday life. I can't do anything, whether it's driving my car, checking my cell phone, buying groceries, supply chain, manufacturing. Oil and gas touches us across the board. But what we also don't want to do any further is make it a us or them conversation when it comes to renewables. The industry at large is an all of the above approach, towards utilizing energy. And we think that, without picking and choosing winners, there's a space for everybody to contribute to the energy mix. And so in taking that message, we're talking with communities, talking with stakeholders, talking with elected officials to see what we can do to help improve our image in our discussions, but what we can also do to continue to uplift communities, especially the rural communities. The last thing I'll say, and what Steer does so well, and where I think the industry can learn just across the board to do better, is to really listen, to take the time to listen. Oftentimes we talk to folks that are, the industry talks to folks that are our champions. And it's easy to have those conversations with people that already appreciate you and already benefit from what you're doing. But it's reaching across the aisle and it's talking to the environmentalist folks. It's talking to people that are outside the comfort zone so that we can bridge that knowledge gap on both sides, and that we can, and to let each other know that we can coexist and be successful in everything that we do. I love that Texas is a leader in energy. I'm very proud to be a part of the oil and gas industry. I'm very proud of the money that we generate that impacts scholarship and education and hospitals. And you go down the line, it just makes me so proud. And I just want folks to understand that we're doing everything that we can to be lockstep in pushing not only the Texas economy forward, but the national economy forward as well.
Awesome, Mr. Vazquez. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We'll have a question or two here for you in a minute. But
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the clock. I got 9 minutes. I'm supposed to be on the floor in about 9 minutes. So I'm gonna, Mike, turn off everything. We'll be in. So hopefully I can go speak and then come back and hopefully join you at the end.
Okay. Well, okay. Thank you, Mr. Cuellar, and we'll look forward to having you back. Get your questions in. I'll keep the witnesses busy until you return. All right. Thank you, Henry. So let me turn to our final witness for the Congressional Western Caucus Forum, Mr. Adrian Lopez. He serves as the Chief Executive Officer at Workforce Solutions in Alamo, Workforce Solutions Alamo in San Antonio, Texas. Working with a vast network of service providers aimed to employ people across several communities. Prior to his current position, Mr. Lopez has spent over 22 years dedicating his career to public service, working with local communities. Well, it's certainly an honor to have you with us today, Mr. Lopez. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn the floor to you.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the opportunity to actually speak to you today and to others, of course, about this really important industry that has a tremendous amount of economic impact to the communities that I serve. I'll speak on two different fronts. One is in relation to my professional career and my current position, but also about my own personal experience growing up in Cuellar, Texas, which is just south of San Antonio, and seeing the oil and gas industry literally transform a community from, overnight, right? From being one of probably the poorest school districts in the state to actually one of the richest. And there's no other industry, I think, that could probably have that level of transformation. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, on the professional side, my workforce board actually represents and serves 13 counties in the South Texas region. 5 of my counties are actually affected by the activities of the Eagle Ford Shale, and has really seen a tremendous amount of employment opportunities, prior to the pandemic. But of course, we also have seen some reduction in force and loss of jobs because of the pandemic, and of course because of the oil crisis and the costs associated with a barrel of oil. Just to give you some insight, during the pre-pandemic, we were occupying, or this industry was occupying, approximately about 12,000 direct residents that were directly associated with mining, quarrying, oil and gas. That does not include things like transportation, does not include things like manufacturing, and all of the other types of sort of jobs that are part of the oil industry. But just in those 12,000 jobs, the annual salary for this particular region was about $104,000. A tremendous amount of economic infusion into these local communities. Some of my friends are some folks that I graduated from high school that didn't get a chance to go to college, or maybe pursued the opportunity not to go to college, are actually probably making more in salary than I'm making as a CEO because they're working in this industry. Unfortunately, the effects of the cost of the barrel of oil, as well as the pandemic, has really sort of had a huge effect on the loss of jobs. And so approximately about 6,000 or so jobs in not only mining, quarrying, and oil and gas, but and other types of industries that are related to oil and gas. They lost those employment opportunities. People lost their jobs in those because of what was happening. That we estimate that the total amount of salaries or annual income loss of that was approximately about $650 million. So for a 13 county area and a region that largely is rural, with the exception of San Antonio and the Bexar County area, that's a huge hit, right? We're slowly starting to come back. We've been adding probably a few hundred jobs. We anticipate that we will continue to grow, and this industry will continue to add probably thousands of jobs over the course of the next few years. But that just gives you sort of kind of a glimpse of that's just in the salaries that those 6,000 folks were making. That doesn't count all of the taxes that Ms. Moreno made reference to. Doesn't count to what used to be a town of Cuellar, 2 motels that's now grown to like 20 plus different hotels and motels, right? And various types of sort of services in both in food and accommodation and hospitality, as well as sort of grown the local economy that in many of these small communities, right? It made the difference between driving on a dirt road or driving on a paved road, and being able to turn on your faucet and have actually clean water come out of your faucet, right? Because those local taxes and the money that's generated goes to fund those necessary infrastructure. And for somebody who grew up in a rural community, when you turn the water on, sometimes it came out clear, sometimes it came out yellow. And so, but fortunately, now where I grew up in that community, they've got clean, potable water. They've got a safe and sanitary way to live, and better housing conditions. All of these are kind of residual effects associated with this industry. So I think now is probably a really good time, given the fact that what we experienced in the pandemic. In our case, over 330,000 people lost their jobs in our 13 county region. Some of them went back to work and lost multiple jobs throughout the course of the last 17 months. In fact, if we look at that number, it's closer to about 500,000. And so the job creation and being able to support an industry like oil and gas that pays the salaries that are sustainable for families to be able to live a comfortable living is crucial, especially at this particular time, and especially as we start to consider what's the next step and what in our economy and what does that look like. There are a certain amount of jobs that we anticipate that potentially are not ever going to come back because of automation and because efficiencies and those types of things. And so supporting these types of sort of industries for us is crucial because they offer real great and real opportunities and an opportunity for people to, not only get an entry-level type of position, but in our case, what we promote is career pathways and an opportunity for continuing sort of advancement. And so we are happy to support the oil and gas industry. They're actually one of the sectors that's prioritized in our strategic plan. We dedicate dollars towards training so that people can become welders and can become truck drivers and can become, other types of, occupations that are crucial to this particular industry. Getting those types of skill set are transferable, not only in terms of oil and gas, but also transferable to other types of industries like manufacturing and aerospace and, and others, right, that we also promote. And so we're happy to work closely hand in hand with industry leaders like Stephanie and Silver and others that bring a real true commitment to economic development and economic vitality to our communities. And I'll just end with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lopez. And gosh, you've all presented different kinds of perspectives. I think illustrating very well how important oil and gas industry is to your communities for the economic strength. But I think I got the message that also for a continuing cleaner environment, the technologies that we can utilize to use these resources as wisely as possible. It's pretty cool, actually. So I promised you some questions. I'm going to start with that and hope Mr. Cuellar gets back so he has an opportunity. I know he'll have some things he'd like to ask. In fact, we'll try to get his questions if we can, just in case he doesn't make it back in order to ask them himself. But let me get started. And I know some of these things are going to be, I think, very interesting to the people that are listening today. So the first thing I want to talk about, not only does the domestic energy production help to bolster and protect our national security, it's very clear about that, but as you all have touched on, it has a huge impact on economic development, as you've talked about in the Eagle Ford Shale area. So Mr. Vazquez, I think you did a great job, if I can say that, of outlining this kind of economic development. The Western Caucus, which I'm honored to be chairman of this term, is working to ensure that this type of development and this kind of job creation can be experienced by communities across the country. In addition to working against misguided executive actions from this current administration, my question is, what more can we be doing to promote these opportunities and to promote the good news that is coming from the oil and gas industry? Any thoughts there, Mr. Vazquez?
I'm sorry, I missed the question because I got kicked off for a second, but so I apologize.
Well, let me ask you again.
Sure.
So I don't know where you got kicked off, but so in addition to working against some of the misguided executive actions from the administration, what more can we be doing to promote these opportunities that all three of you have talked about and promote the good news that's coming out of the oil and gas industry?
Sure. I think, first of all, it's important that the administration or whoever is having these conversations that are trying to pit renewables against fossil fuels, it doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be either or. And the path towards a total transition to renewables is just so far down the road that it's inconceivable for folks to think that you can just up and replace the hundreds of thousands of oil and gas jobs with the tens of thousands of renewable jobs that exist in this state. And so I think removing that divide is important. And also, I think holding the media accountable for the way they present some of this information is so critical. It's overreactionary, and it's good clickbait, but some of these articles are, the headlines are so off base of what's actually in the article in regards to renewable discussions and energy development that people don't feel like they don't have to read to know what the article says. So that's important, especially in a rural community. Folks, are very trusting. They're very honest, hardworking folks. Not that the urban folks aren't, but some of the resources for news and information in rural areas is limited. So we've got to be careful in the way that's presented. And I can tell you, as bad as the rhetoric was in some of the discussions late last year, there hasn't been a real impact locally negatively. Now, in New Mexico, where there's a lot of federal land, there has been Colorado, other areas. Texas stands to benefit from that, but we shouldn't be putting those states and their economies at risk just because we're trying to meet some metrics that really aren't achievable in the near term. My opinion, Stephanie.
You're all in this together, right? And I think Ms. Moreno talked about actually the good job the oil and gas industry has been doing in reducing greenhouse gases, and the fact that the gas industry in particular is responsible for our reduction in CO2 emissions over the last decade or so, just underscoring what Mr. Vazquez just said, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to continue highlighting those technology advancements. And at STEER, we have an Eagle Ford Excellence Award every year that highlights innovation and technology throughout the Eagle Ford Shale. We're going on our 8th year having the Excellence Awards this year. And it's something that everyone in the industry can be a part of, to tell their story and let these communities know all of the good things that are happening. Because Silver's right, you know, the media doesn't, it's not the headline that, you know, CO2 emissions are reducing because of the oil and gas industry. That you're not going to find that on your major news networks. But we have to continue telling that story to our neighbors and to our friends. And we need those that are in the industry, employees that are in the industry, to really talk to their friends and neighbors about what they're doing and how they rely on these jobs and how important it is to these communities. Like I said, when I was county judge, I saw how so many communities were really hurting. And even as oil and gas fluctuates, there is a constant, steady stream of revenue, a baseline that counties rely on. And without it, transitioning away, like you mentioned, Congressman, transitioning away from those revenues only means that the property owners will pay more. It doesn't, no one else is going to come in and pay those taxes except for property owners. And so you're going to outprice people from their homes, from their businesses. And so we have to be real careful when we have these conversations, but also make sure that we're being very honest about what the reality is and how that's going to affect all of these communities.
So we've been, as a Western Caucus, working really hard to highlight some of the impacts of actions taken by the Biden administration that really are working to diminish the oil and gas industries. You all brought up really good points about how this energy sector and the revenues derived from it reach far beyond what most Americans probably think of when they think about oil and gas. And you just touched on some of these things, Ms. Moreno, the economic impacts of energy development on Texas communities. I wanted to give you a little bit more opportunity to dive into that. And could you explain, so our listeners, our viewers today really understand what the effect that the Biden administration's moratorium has had on, you mentioned schools, on public safety, on local infrastructure projects. And just, could you help all of us understand what those impacts are and have been?
Sure. And like Silver mentioned, you know, the state of Texas has been very lucky to not have the impact that New Mexico and some of the other states with more federal lands have had. But my boss, Todd Staples at the Texas Oil and Gas Association, says all the time, anytime you attack one sector of the oil and gas industry, it makes it that much more easier to attack the other sectors. And so, you know, we're in this together. We're going to continue to promote the good things that are happening in the oil and gas industry. But when you think about what a moratorium would do or how it could impact the state of Texas, I sit on a school board, and we rely very heavily on, you know, our tax base to come up with our safety plans for our police department, our ISD police department. How much we pay our teachers is dependent on that tax revenue. How many students per teacher we have in the classrooms. So I mean, down to every decision that school boards make in school districts, that cities make, whether they're able to replace pipes, water pipe infrastructure throughout the city, upgrading any of their equipment to impact the roads. Like Mr. Lopez was saying, we the counties rely very heavily on this tax revenue to make sure that roads are improved year after year after year. And in the state of Texas, most of our revenues come from property taxes and come from those minerals. And so it's so important. People don't understand the extent of services that counties provide. And when 87% of your tax base in Dimmitt County, near where Cotulla is, when 87% of their tax base is coming from oil and natural gas, reducing that, it could be detrimental to how the sheriff's office is funded, how many deputies are on the street patrolling. Veteran service officers that are assigned to each county are funded through tax revenues. And so everything that you can think of, most services that you don't even realize are paid for the county or the school or the city, heavily rely on tax revenues. And in the Eagle Ford Shale, where so much of the tax base, even in B County, where we have just a tip of the Eagle Ford Shale, the very southern part of the Eagle Ford Shale, we still have 20% of our tax base is oil and natural gas. And that's about $2 million of the county's budget. And that would fund the entire sheriff's office. So you think about that. I mean, you think about taking away $2 million from a $12 million budget, you're really going to either be cutting services or increasing your tax rate.
Devastating impacts.
Devastating.
Can I add one thing to that, Congressman? You've got some of the strongest housing markets in the country in Texas, and Stephanie and I are able to work with a number of natural gas providers, and these developers are absolutely 100% wanting natural gas to those homes. It makes them more marketable. That's what folks from out of state who are moving here want, is natural gas in the home. So I don't think sometimes people make that correlation when they turn the stove on and are able to heat a pot of water, or turn their water heater on and get some hot water for the shower. I don't know that correlation is always made. And it's up to us to do a better job of that, because that's exactly what the market is calling for, but that's not what you're hearing from the highest levels. They're not encouraging that.
Another aspect of this, very important. So obviously, when we talk about Texas, we got to talk about oil and gas, right? But Texas is also, and I don't know if a lot of people realize this, but Texas is also pursuing an all of the above energy portfolio, which I might say is a key pillar of our platform as well in the Western Caucus. Unfortunately, it seems to me that the administration doesn't seem to understand that we can't fully transition to renewable energy overnight. Part of the reason for this is the massive number of jobs that would be lost without a real plan to transition the workforce. We saw this earlier, if you remember, early on in the administration, when President Biden canceled the Keystone XL pipeline. Thousands of jobs were lost, and thousands of more were prevented from even being created. And despite the promises that we've heard of green jobs, those Americans, those thousands of people are still unemployed. So Mr. Lopez, if I could turn to you next. I want you to, if you could, expand on the importance of oil and gas jobs in Texas, and how these industries play a role in our responsible transition to the renewable energy resources that we're all going towards.
Yeah, definitely, Congressman. As I mentioned earlier, these are very well-paying jobs. I think they're the oil and gas industry of today is no longer the oil and gas industry of yesterday. And what you will find actually is a lot of innovation associated with these types of jobs. What was traditionally, an industry reserved for male figures is no longer the case. You now have females operating, large machinery, doing the actual fracking of the shale in these areas. And these are very well-educated individuals that come out with engineering degrees and with all sorts of really wonderful skills that are adding, to the overall vitality and the strength of the workforce, the local workforce. One of the things that the industry does very well, just as well is they get back to their community from the educational and training standpoint, right? So these are some of the same employers that are offering work experience, internships, educational opportunities for local schools, so that they teach them about, the importance of the environment and how the environment works, and the importance of natural resources, right? All of that is key from the perspective of how we're going to move forward as a nation in terms of what the next economy looks like. I have a wife who is a high school counselor, and we always get into these discussions about, how many times do you talk about careers and jobs with your students? And the answer is usually none or very little. And that's where industry like oil and gas come into play, that play an extremely vital role in transforming what people are learning and what kids are learning in the classroom environment, and applying that to practical matters of everyday life, right? And about jobs and careers. And so when we talk about what the future of jobs plays, or what the oil industry plays in that role, it is a lot about education, and it is a lot about innovation, and it is a lot about sort of moving the workforce along with us. And I think that the industry may have gotten a bad rap in prior years about that human capital was a resource that was expendable. I don't think that is the case anymore with the industry. And quite frankly, the largest, probably, and most important resources is actually the human capital. And I think investment that goes on both within the context of the industry, but also within all of the things that we've discussed today about community and economic development, really goes a long way in trying to figure out what that next step is in the future of jobs.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Lopez. I think it's important here to note that these green jobs that may pay a living wage, but truly only offer a fraction of the pay that's provided for by jobs in the oil and gas industries. At least that's what I'm gathering. We looked up and found a study that was conducted by the North American Building Trades Union. Over 90% of the jobs associated with wind and solar energy pay less than the average salary of the upstream oil and gas workers in both Texas and California. They also found that nearly 70% of wind and 84% of solar energy jobs in the US do not even meet the average Texas salary. So to have them equally counterbalance each other, it's just not going to happen.
Can I also add, Congressman, we have a wind farm in South Bee County that when I was county judge, was very supportive of, because I am all of the above energy solutions. Every energy solution has its place in our market, but there were 0 permanent jobs. The infrastructure, there were a lot of temporary jobs that were created with that, and we appreciated the influx of money and jobs that came in, but they were temporary, 6 to 8 months. We did not maintain one permanent job. So that's really important to part of the discussion when we're talking about transitioning and when you're calculating these numbers, because we need to be talking about permanent jobs that are going to stay here, going to be in the community, and not just the jobs that it's going to create to build the wind farm or the roads or the infrastructure needed for it.
Okay, good, thank you. And I should have said that at the outset. If any of you have any comments to make on any of the questions, please feel free to chime in. So Mr. Cuellar is not going to be able to rejoin us. He's on the floor now, having to speak on some legislation. and these things are unpredictable. So appreciate your patience. But what I do have, I was able to get some of the questions that he wanted to ask you. And so I'm going to do my best to just think of me as Henry Cuellar right now. I'm not nearly as good at looking as him probably, but I'll do my best. So one of the questions he had, and this was, I think, directed to everybody. So if you have a response, great. If not, that's fine too. But his first question is how critical, and I think he's referring to the current phase that the country has been going through. How critical is the oil and gas industry to our economic recovery and certainly our growth? And so anybody have any thoughts on how critical oil and gas is to all of that?
Sure, I can go first. I mean, I can tell you, we describe the oil and gas industry as a lifeblood of the Texas economy. And there was a direct correlation between production and distribution of fossil fuels to markets that was directly attributed to the opening and the closing of the markets. And I think that what needs to happen is there needs to be a plan in place to help disrupt some of those interruptions. Now, it's tough to plan for a pandemic or something of that sort, but I certainly think that the more oil and gas that's produced in Texas, the better it is not only for our state but for the nation at large. And when you see these records in manufacturing, you see these ports across the country that are full of import and export goods. That if you trace it all back, a lot of that comes back to oil and gas, and we're very proud of that. Now, but again, the general citizen in the U.S. that doesn't really understand oil and gas may not make that correlation or be able to trace the supply chain back to what we're doing here. But it's so much more than just upstream and oil rigs and frac cruisers. A huge supply chain that comes with oil and gas, and we think it's very beneficial to the economy in Texas, but at large as well.
Good, thank you.
So I would just add
Sure.
just a couple of points. One is that, as I mentioned, for our region here, lost 330,000 jobs. A lot of the jobs that are opening up are, to a large extent, low skill, low wage type of jobs. A good portion of South Texas, unfortunately, the population does not have either a high school diploma, or if they do, that's probably as far as they went. And so when we talk about sort of real opportunities for folks that may not have formal education, and let me just kind of tell you that we're tracking the data and the statistics associated about who's getting reemployed, right? For all those 330,000 people, based on education, the largest percentages are those with bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or some level of college, right? And so, this industry does not require, in many instances, formal education. Does require skill set, does require certifications, does require some level of training. But it does offer the opportunity to have some level of equity between those that have formal education in terms of degrees and those that do not have. For an area that has been largely, poor in South Texas and in other portions of Texas, the oil and gas industry has transformed that, right? Providing real economic opportunities for folks, right? If you were to read, reports from the 90s about some of these areas, they were describing them as third world countries, right? And the oil and gas industry has really sort of transformed that. You can no longer say that about those, those communities. And so I think part of it is about sort of looking at, what the current situation is today, right? But also about sort of looking at historically, absent of the oil and gas industry, what are these communities like? They probably go back to, poor, could potentially describe them as third world country type of situations.
Yeah, good. So I'm going to ask two more questions. And I know again, thank you for your indulgence. This has been an excellent discussion, and I appreciate all of the ideas and thoughts that you're sharing. So one more thing I want to ask is about, what do you think are the misunderstandings about the oil and gas sector, and what can be done to ensure that those misunderstandings don't get in the way of the industry continuing to contribute to our Texas's, our nation's energy independence?
I'll start. I think that the biggest misunderstanding is our contribution to lowering emissions. I think, that the numbers that I talked about previously, a lot of people don't realize that oil and gas is a big part of the discussion when it comes to reducing emissions. It's the innovation that our companies are putting forward, the investments that they're making more so than the government and any other private sector combined every year. So I think that's a huge common misconception, is that we are a part of the discussion. I actually sit on the San Antonio Climate Action Adaptation Plan. I'm on the technical committee, and we are at the table talking solutions and how do we address adapting to a changing climate. And so I think that that's really important to know, is that oil and gas continues to be a leader in this discussion. Also, I think that one of a big misconception is how important oil and gas is to everybody's life. And when we talk about a transition, I'll take it a step further. I don't see a transition. We don't have a plan for a transition. You need oil and natural gas. We do not have infrastructure. We do not have storage technology for wind and solar. It's just not there. And so to talk about a transition kind of makes the assumption that it's moving in that direction and it's on its way, but they're really, truly, the technology isn't there to transition away from oil and natural gas. I read an article, I came up to an article from the late 80s from the Los Angeles Times on how they were going to transition commuters away from the combustible engine. And what they didn't count on was that we were going to have more efficient engines as time moved on, that the oil and gas industry wasn't going to give up, that they were going to persevere in identifying technologies to reduce emissions. And they've done that. And they've done that in every sector. Valero has the Diamond Green Diesel joint venture, which is the world's second largest producer of sustainable renewable diesel. And that's just, those stories don't get out there. They use recycled animal fats, used cooking oil, and distillers corn oil to produce a low carbon fuel that reduces the life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions up to 80% compared to traditional diesel. And those stories are not out there, but it's a part of the discussion. It's a part of those solutions, and we'll continue to talk about it. And we really appreciate you, Congressman, for getting that message out as well and allowing this forum.
Well, thank you. You just accomplished that yourself. Thank you very much.
I think one way, Congressman, that is absolutely clear to how supportive oil and gas is to wind energy specifically is, anytime I'm driving down I-10 to Midland, I see about 4 or 5 diesel trucks hauling those wind turbine blades across the country. And so without diesel energy, those wind turbines aren't getting across the country to get where they need to be installed. And then when I'm watching them be installed, you've got diesel generated cranes that are putting them up into the sky. So it's just, that's a little bit tongue in cheek. I'm saying this, but it's not an if or, it is an all of the above approach. I think, but going back to your question, the one thing that we can do, or we should do, is some of the best and brightest folks in the world work in oil and gas, and they are doing their darndest, especially in times where prices are depressed, to find efficiencies, to find ways to make the business better. And our business is better when we're environmentally responsible. There's no question about it. So we've got to tell that story, and we've got to tell it in communities. We've got to tell it at the state level, at the federal level, so that folks know. And we've got to stop looking at it as patting ourselves on the back and really sort of protecting our industry, because it seems like we've come under attack here lately.
Okay, good. So my last question, I think maybe kind of, I hope, help sum up our discussion. And I'm going to give you lots of latitude on how you want to answer this. But tell me, what expectations do you have for the oil and gas industry over the next few years? Where do you see room for growth and innovation? What are you excited about? And what are you concerned about? Mr. Lopez, can we start with you on that? Is that?
I think from our perspective, what we're looking at and what our projections show is that there's going to still be thousands of jobs that are going to be added. You know, one of the things that we try to take advantage of here is to take advantage of where innovation is being created potentially in one sector and utilize it for another sector. You know, part of I think of how South Texas operates is in large part a very collaborative sort of spirit. You know, we have, for example, you know, technologies that are being put together and built out at Port San Antonio and in other places, right? That are actually, you know, benefiting the oil and the gas industry and other industries. We have Southwest Research Institute that is located here that probably does about 80% of NASA's work today. These all industries do intersect, and they do work together, and technology being created, whether in oil or gas or another industry, actually does have a crossover. So we think, at least from our perspective, the learning and being at the table, as Stephanie was mentioning, is really the way that you know, growth should happen and economic development should happen. And so we see a lot of positive things coming out of the oil and gas industry in the future.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I think the oil and gas industry is going to continue to be leaders in this discussion and continue to be leaders when it comes to innovation and finding solutions. The Texas Methane and Flaring Coalition, which is a voluntary coalition of oil and gas industry and trade associations in Texas, committed to ending the use of routine flaring, and that's a big discussion in the state of Texas. And so I think that, you know, before regulations come down, you're going to see our industry stepping up and making those commitments on their own. And so I think that that's a great thing for communities. It's a great thing for Texas. It's a great thing for our country, but it's also a great thing for our environment. And so we're looking forward to continuing to be part of this discussion and to also continue being a part of the solutions. Thank you, Congressman.
Oh, great, thank you. I think we might have lost Mr. Vazquez one more time, but I just want to thank all of you again for taking time to participate in today's forum. It truly has been very interesting. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules. There's Mr. Vazquez again. I'm thanking all of you. I appreciate you being back. As you all noted, this is really an important issue. It truly has impacts on our local communities and people's lives. We've got a great story to tell, our energy story in the United States of America. And I appreciate you telling that story and sharing. You guys are at the front lines and you work in this every single day. And I appreciate you helping the rest of us understand your particular roles and part of the energy industry. And I think together we can make a lot of difference in moving forward. One personal note, Mrs. Moreno, you mentioned Todd Staples. Please give him my regards. He was Commissioner of Agriculture at the same time I was in the state of Washington.
That's what he was talking about, the apples just earlier today.
Oh, very good. Hope you say hello to him. But thanks to all of you, Mr. Lopez, Mr. Vazquez, Mrs. Moreno. And I also want to thank Mr. Cuellar for being a part of this, and very much appreciate you taking the time today. So thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Good. And that's all for our forum today from the Congressional Western Caucus. We want to thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.